Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the City of Glendale's June 3rd, 2015 Planning Commission meeting. May we please have a roll call?
Planning Commissioners Astorian.
Here.
Landrigan.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Yes.
So, an item number 2 is reporting of the agenda. Ms. Stutler, that is your department, I believe.
Yes, the agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, May 27th, 2015 on the bulletin board outside City Hall and also on the city's website.
Thank you. And Commissioner Manukian, if we may follow in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we have an approval for the minutes of April 15?
I move.
Second.
Very good. We don't need a roll call on this one.
No.
And we don't see any cards of oral communication or no zoning appeals. Are there any planning commission items? I don't think so. And as far as old business is concerned, we have 1225 Reynolds Drive. And I believe this is being continued. Is that what it is?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Planning Commissioners, there's a request from the applicant to continue the hearing to the June 17, 2015 Planning Commission meeting with no further public notice, and staff concurs with the continuance.
Okay. Any comments about it? Are we okay about the continuance?
The letter indicated that they were waiting for some information from the city. Did they get that?
Yes, Planning Commissioners. Revised plans have come in, have been submitted, and we're in the process of evaluating them. And then we'll be doing a cover report. Probably we'll attach the old staff report to it for reference and the environmental documents and bring them back on June 17.
So moved for continuance.
Second.
Very good. We don't need a roll call on this either, right?
Yes, you do for continuance.
Then we should get one.
Planning Commissioners Landrigan.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Manukian.
Aye.
Chairperson Astorian.
Yes. Under new business, item A, Mr. Loomis, I believe you're the one that is.
That's correct.
So you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I will read into the record the project description and actions before starting my presentation. This is regarding a Glendale Municipal Code amendments and downtown specific plan amendments. The project description is it is proposed to amend the downtown specific plan, or DSP, in order to revise incentives related to height and density bonuses and related miscellaneous text and maps amendments. This is general plan amendment case number PGPA 1503604 and PGPA 1503605 for the map. The recommendation from staff is the Community Development Department recommends the Planning Commission consider an addendum to the DSP final EIR and your recommendation to the City Council, and recommend that Planning Commission provide a recommendation to the City Council to adopt the proposed amendments to the downtown specific plan and zoning code. And with that, I have a 30-slide presentation, and I can walk through all the specific amendments and some of the thought process behind them and how we arrived at this location. Before I do, I want to thank you for your patience in this. I know we were intended to go last week, and then we've subsequently given you additional material from your last meeting that was carried over. So with apologies for some of the kind of confusion in the information, hopefully we can walk you through it if you have any confusions. I do also want to acknowledge Chris Agardi and Justin Robertson from Urban Design staff, who actually did a bulk of the sort of busy work, if you will, the sort of producing of the graphics and all the strike-through amendments and that sort of stuff. So that's why they're in the audience, is to see the fruits of their labor. So with that, this amendment, the downtown specific plan, by way of background, was adopted in 2006. It has been amended periodically since then. roughly once a year would be kind of the average, I would say. Probably half of those amendments are really amendments that focus on the land use tables, particularly as the zoning code land use tables and definitions are amended. As you recall, from time to time, you'll see just the land use tables of the DSP included in those zoning code cleanups, and that's to ensure consistency definition-wise between the DSP and the zoning code. The other half of the amendments have been more kind of policy-oriented, as directed by the City Council. The last significant policy amendment, I would say, was probably the creation of the Art and Entertainment District focused on Maryland Avenue and Broadway. It's probably the last sort of significant kind of policy direction that the council has given us regarding the DSP. Today, we're looking at another somewhat significant policy change in the downtown specific plan. And so by way of background, this was initiated last year. The City Council had requested a policy review of the downtown specific plan, which we did with them in a study session in October of last year. And this on the screen was the agenda we gave the City Council. It was largely generated by the council over concerns about the pace of downtown development, some of the potential impacts of downtown development, concern about some of the design of individual buildings or specific buildings in the downtown. And so we were really presenting to the council a kind of update on the downtown specific plan. It's almost a 10-year update. We're about 8 years into it. And sort of saying, here's where we think, here's where we're at, here's what we know. And if the council had a desire to make any changes, it was an appropriate time to do so. So important to sort of take a big step back and remember where the downtown specific plan came from. And I'm going to give you 2 slides of what was about a 50-slide presentation to the council, just to sort of keep this presentation relatively short. Some of the goals in the downtown specific plan, at the foremost, was to protect neighborhoods from development pressure. The downtown specific plan was generated to provide a conduit for principally residential development. And this was in the sort of wake or the consequence or parallel to some significant downzoning of the multifamily zones, as well as the purchasing of open space in the hillsides that began to limit development potential in other locations of the city. We were also looking to adopt mobility policies that could support that kind of density, which we did through the adoption of the mobility study the following year in 2007. We hear a lot now about the 18-hour downtown and promoting the downtown business community, the logic of sort of focusing new development in the downtown, new economic investment was that it would help the downtown business community, the restaurants, and the shop owners in the downtown. And that the downtown specific plan was intended as well to really promote quality development in the downtown and be a platform for additional investment. So these were some of the goals we reminded the council we had when we started the downtown specific plan in 2005, really, approximately a year before it was built. So one of the things we did is we did a sort of analysis that we presented to the council to try and assess sort of where we're at. So these numbers are from 2006, when the downtown specific plan was adopted, through 2014, October, when we did this study session with the council. And in that time frame, there's been, as you can see, about 4,800 multifamily residential units approved, built, or under construction in that time frame. Now, there's been a lot that was approved that then lost their entitlements. So what you see, the 4,800 is what's been built, is currently under construction, or had active entitlements as of October. 4,800 units citywide. In the multifamily zones, your R1250, 2250, 3050, et cetera, that's 258 total units, only 5% of the total. Along San Fernando Road, redevelopment area, which is another sort of mixed-use focus zone, we see about 1,400 residential units, or 30% of the total, whereas the downtown specific plan has absorbed or taken on almost 2/3 of the entire multifamily production that the city has seen since the downtown specific plan was adopted. So based on these numbers, one, you do see a lot of development in downtown, but we're trying to sort of explain that it's in context. That's 2/3 of all the development we've seen across the entire city in this 8-year period. So that's why it seems very intense. But in terms of a goal of sort of protecting the neighborhoods from overdevelopment and allowing a kind of conduit, focal point for multifamily development, based on these numbers, we think the plan is working. Some context in terms of how much potential there is. Per the Downtown Specific Plan EIR that was adopted concurrent with the DSP in 2006, there's roughly 4,000 units available in the DSP as it analyzed in that EIR, probably another 2,000 or so available in the San Fernando Road area. But you can see, according to the housing element in the multifamily zones, there's still quite a bit of capacity. So again, the Downtown Specific Plan premise of trying to focus development into downtown seems to be a success. And of course, we can't say whether this is all causal relative to downtown or whether it's sort of coincidental, but there are some pretty powerful sort of set of numbers, we think. So we wanted to present this to the council to provide some context about the scale and pace and kind of development in the DSP zone. So council ultimately said we'd like to focus on a number of different topics. We came back to them in February of this year with a specific amendment proposal for them to initiate. And this is specifically what they initiated in February, was largely to focus on the density bonuses, heightened density bonuses that are built into the Downtown Specific Plan, to modify those. And specifically, you can see which ones they asked us to look at and modify. And so that's in February they initiated the amendments that you're seeing today. And we'll go through these kind of individually so you can understand what was proposed in October, what the council directed us to do, and kind of where we're at today. But to remind you, the Downtown Specific Plan is not sort of uniform density across the entire downtown area. There are a variety of individual districts in the downtown. This is basically the height map you would have seen before the Downtown Specific Plan. Everything in the DSP had the same height, which is basically unlimited height. If you could figure out how you're going to park a 100-story building in the downtown, you could do that per the zoning code. The DSP introduced height limits that are tailored to the existing skylines. So of the 11 or 12 different districts in the Downtown Specific Plan, each of them has a slightly different height and density ratio that is largely based on the existing skylines. So the analogy you can see in this map, we explain very in frequent public meetings, is that we've got two high-rise nodes existing in the downtown. Imagine you drape a blanket over the downtown skyline. You'd have two sort of peaks at those high-rise nodes, and then it sort of feather out or kind of get flattered as it sort of draped towards the surrounding three-story neighborhoods. And so that was sort of the analogy for how the height districts were generated. So as I said, each of these different districts has both a different height ratio and a different density ratio. There is also a baseline ratio, and then there is another ratio that's higher than that, that is the max you can employ if you participate in the density bonus program. And again, they're different based on different districts. So again, as I said, the council directed us to focus our attention and amendments on the incentives for heightened density bonus. There was a sense that maybe these were being too liberally utilized. So we looked at what had actually been built. This is a relatively current map as of October. The projects that have been approved or under construction or recently built as part of the Downtown Specific Plan. And what we found is that 12 of these projects have utilized the DSP's public open space bonus. So projects that provide more than a code-required public open space are entitled to a heightened density bonus. Again, that bonus varied depending on which district they were in and what the delta was between the baseline and the maximum, overall maximum heightened density bonus they could, that was available in that district. We have two buildings that are building to LEED Silver green building standards. That's another one of the heightened one of the other bonuses. There's two hotels, another one of the bonuses. One project is utilized, that's the Arts Colony project at the YMCA, utilized an affordable housing bonus that was part of the DSP. And then we had two projects that also that utilized the separate state housing bonus, or SB 1818. So there was, at the time the DSP was adopted, SB 1818 was very new. It just come online. So we had written an affordable housing bonus as part of the DSP, and then SB 1818 came along subsequent to that. So we kind of at the moment have two affordable housing bonuses available in the DSP. And what's happened is that the two projects that utilized SB 1818 have combined them with other heightened density bonuses, the DSP provides, and that was perceived as sort of double dipping, if you will, into the height and density program. And then 5 of the projects in the downtown specific plan requested no height and density bonuses at all. So this is where we're at in terms of the projects utilizing the density bonus program that's as we stand right now.
Can you
So-
go back to the previous slide? So the total number of projects in downtown, if you add all of these up, regardless of the type of the project, that's the total number that have been built
Or have active entitlements or
or have
plan check.
active entitlements. So you got 14, 16, 17, 19, 24 projects.
That's 24.
In
Of
downtown.
fairly large significant projects. There's of course been some, the Museum of Neon Art, for example, is not on this list. So there's been some smaller projects that are more in the way of facade renovations. But these are the ones that had to go to the City Council for approval.
So half have used the public open space incentive.
Correct. And so in particular, that's one of the reasons Council in particular asked us to take a closer look at that incentive. Because as they were approving projects, they had a sense that not every project was delivering the open space that they had expected they would get as part of this incentive. So as you'll see, we've introduced a large number of new standards in particular to that incentive.
Thank you.
So as adopted, as the plan currently exists, this is the range of projects or kind of design characteristics or use characteristics that entitle projects to height and density bonuses. Again, they vary based on the different bonus. So for example, if you bring a hotel to the city, you are allowed to build to the maximum threshold immediately by bringing a hotel because the value of the TOT taxes and the tourist trade and economic value of that is seen as being desirable. Likewise with affordable housing, allows you immediately to build to the maximum threshold established by the DSP, whereas the public open space exists as kind of a ratio right now. And I'll get into that in a moment. So they vary based on what the incentive was. So when we came to council in February to initiate this the zoning amendment here that you're reviewing today, this was our proposal. For affordable housing, we had proposed we need to clarify the relationship with SB 1818. Since that wasn't done at the time the DSP was adopted, we thought it was time to sort of clean that up and say, how are you SB 1818 relates to this? For the art galleries and museums, we had proposed to increase that incentive, whereas you can see for hotel preservation and adaptive reuse or reuse of existing buildings, we proposed no change. Public open space, we proposed to tighten the standards, eliminate 2 of the incentives, and codify standards for the LEED Platinum rating. And again, I'm going to go through these individually. Council's direction was largely the same as proposed by staff, except they proposed or directed us to eliminate the art gallery and museum incentive. So on that one, just to address this, begin addressing the council direction individually. As adopted as currently exists, the art gallery incentive basically gives you the gallery square footage is free. It doesn't count towards your FAR. So if you bring in a 5,000 square foot gallery, you basically get 5,000 square feet free in your FAR calculations. However, we require you to put forward a 5-year business plan for our art gallery. And the intention there was to say, don't come and say, I'm going to give you a gallery, and then the day after you open the building, you say, well, I'm going to hang one art show, and then I'm going to lease it out to a Starbucks. You need to have a gallery that's going to be a gallery concern for 5 years. Our proposal in February was to double that incentive. So basically, not only would you get the gallery floor square footage for free in your FAR, but you'd get an additional, say, 5,000 square feet if it was a 5,000 square foot gallery. We'd keep the requirement for a business plan. I thought that was still important. And this was in part because of a recommendation coming out of the Arts and Culture Commission. They wanted to see, in their strategic planning process for the year before, a little greater sort of incentives into the zoning code to encourage arts uses. Without too much discussion, the council directed us to just strike that incentive altogether under the feeling that there were other ways the city could encourage museum and gallery spaces to locate into the downtown without necessarily them being specific about what those were. So that was the direction they gave us.
So, I'm sorry, but the art gallery and the museum, this was considering if it was part of a larger project. It's
Absolutely.
when it's going to be.
Right.
And so we think right now in this city of Glendale that we are at the level that we can just attract on a standalone art gallery or a museum. That's what we are saying.
That might be a fair interpretation of the council's direction, because yes, this was based on the thought that perhaps you come in with maybe an office building or retail building, you have a relationship with, say, Gagosian Gallery in Beverly Hills, you're going to bring them in to be a tenant and an anchor as part of your new development, so you would get the heightened density bonus for bringing the gallery in. It really wasn't drafted in a way that would allow sort of conversion of existing spaces, because existing spaces are they already have the space they have.
And some of the best art galleries and, well, I don't know about museums that I've seen have been existing spaces and really repositioned spaces.
Right. And I will say one of the other zoning code incentives we have for museum galleries is if they're within downtown specific plan, they're not required to provide any additional parking than the building already carries. So they're generally parked as retail uses otherwise. And to be fair, this was a later amendment that came as part of the Art and Entertainment District. Since this came on board, not a single developer has asked us how to employ this or suggested they had an interest in using this incentive. So in some ways, this might be an academic incentive to have on the table, because nobody's considered it.
Even if you're going to double the FAR?
Perhaps, as I said, not a single developer has even said, we have a gallery use, how could we use this? Could we get more out of it?
Sure.
So.
Thank you.
For the affordable housing incentive, as I said, the DSP, when it was adopted, was right around the same time that SB 1818 was enacted into law by the state. So there is an affordable housing incentive that's written into the downtown specific plan that is not SB 1818. SB 1818 legislation exists in the zoning code and can be used by downtown development. So we have two affordable housing incentives in the downtown specific plan, which has caused some degree of confusion. Because SB 1818 also applies, as I said, some development has been able to utilize a DSP incentive, such as green building, and then build out to a maximum threshold, and then build beyond that by using SB 1818. And the example that people point their finger towards is the Elevator Broadway Lofts project where Circuit City used to be. That project has a certain scale and mass because of the sort of using two different incentives at the same time. So that was perceived, particularly with that project, as being an issue for the councils. So our proposal was to specifically prohibit the combination of SB 1818 with other incentives. Another issue we have utilizing SB 1818 is that we've had to do this a bit on a case-by-case basis, because SB 1818 uses density per acre to establish the maximum density that then allows the SB 1818 calculation to be put on top of that. The DSP is all floor area ratio based. So we have to translate floor area ratio for a particular site into density per acre to calculate SB 1818. So there's a lot of, as I said, it's all done on a case-by-case basis, which has been problematic when people propose affordable housing projects. So the proposal that we have today is that we would eliminate the separate and parallel downtown specific plan bonus, affordable housing bonus, and just have SB 1818. And so it would be the same affordable housing bonus that exists across the entire city. And that we would specifically prohibit the combination of any DSP density bonus incentives, including SB 1818. The reason for this, so that would be, not only could you not use SB 1818 on top of green building, but you couldn't use green building plus public open space. You picked one incentive and you played your cards.
Mr. Loomis, I have a question. What is the current status of your affordable housing shortage or needs in the city? The reason I'm asking is that if they were able to, developers were able to dip into it, let's say twice, using this incentive and then the other menu items with SB 1818, would there, all these developers coming into the city, so taking advantage of that? Now, do we have the affordable housing issues resolved as a result of that? The reason I'm asking is that now we're going to make it more difficult for developers to come in to develop affordable housing. That's gonna, actually derail the efforts to have the affordable housing in the city. So, I think if, we need to encourage to give more menu items, to give more incentives to the developers for this type of efforts. So it seems like, to me, we're going backwards on this.
Sure. It's a legitimate concern. We would still allow SB 1818 within the downtown specific plan, so there would still be the opportunity that you would have everywhere else in the city to do affordable housing with density bonuses within the downtown specific plan. But it does ultimately would regulate the sort of production of housing by preventing the sort of combination of menu items. As regards to our affordable housing need, I'm going to look to Laura Stoller's written our housing element and see if she can answer that question.
Yeah, our housing element is in compliance with state law, and a change like this really wouldn't make a difference in that. When we calculate our regional housing need, what we use for that is our multifamily zones, not our DSP. So this would really have no change in that. If anything, it just expands the area in which you can build affordable housing in Glendale. So this would be a benefit to us. And I understand the change. The change actually is good in terms of actually providing a threshold for us, because when it's just design-based, we really don't have a clear threshold that we can use for measuring what a density bonus would be under SB 1818. And this would give us that threshold. So it's actually a benefit, I think, for everybody, because it makes it clearer to developers as well as the public of what the maximum could be on a property for affordable housing.
So if that answers the question, it might be a reasonable segue that what we were proposing is then to sort of write into the DSP what would be the unit per acre threshold for the various districts purely for the purposes of applying SB 1818. So we're translating FAR to units per acre.
Mr. Loomis, I don't want to cause you losing track of your thoughts, but did the thought ever occur that perhaps a mandate or a requirement to be made to include affordable housing, any kind of development that was going to go into the downtown specific plan?
Without sort of putting words in your mouth, something akin to an inclusionary housing ordinance? As I recall in our discussions in the downtown specific plan, that was not a major concern. As the plan was crafted. The presumptions and kind of foundational principles of the plan were crafted before I joined the team, so it may have come up at that point. I can say that the downtown specific plan is largely the central redevelopment project area with some additions, and that the original redevelopment project area for the center of the city was adopted at a time when redevelopment was not required to have an inclusionary housing. So that is perhaps one reason why it was never introduced as part of the downtown specific plan.
Thank you.
So we went through an exercise in two different directions to try and translate the FAR density that would apply to multifamily, retail, office, or any kind of mixed-use development in the downtown to a unit per acre number that would be the maximum threshold by which then an SB 1818 project could establish their density bonus. So the numbers, you could see on the right-hand side of the column, the numbers we came up with. Alex Theater A is basically the mid-brand district. There's a larger map behind you. This is really the two block right around the Alex Theater, where the existing height limit in the DSP, even with the density bonus, is only 2 stories. So we really think this is not an applicable place to try and utilize a density bonus for affordable housing. East Broadway is the neighborhood generally surrounding City Hall, up to about Louise Street, the sort of right-hand leg of the DSP. And then the Galleria is fairly self-explanatory. A lot of the development that we've seen has been in the transitional mid-Orange Maryland districts. The transitional districts are really the west edge of Central, the south edge of Colorado, where the DSP engages or backs up to the adjoining R1250 neighborhoods. Orange Central and Broadway Center A is really the sort of zone between Orange and Central Avenue, between Wilson up to Duran. where a lot of the major development has occurred. And in Broadway Center, B and C and the Gateway District are really where we have existing high-rises. So what we did is, looking at the transitional zone in particular, we thought that 90 units an acre was an appropriate number. And by way of comparison, the SFMU zone, which is, of course, out in San Fernando Road and kind of adjoining streets, where SFMU backs up to multifamily zones, the density per the code right now in SFMU is 87 units an acre. So we're very close, pretty much comparable at 90. SFMU zone, when it's not adjacent to any other multifamily, if it's just adjacent to commercial or industrial, the density is 100 units an acre. So for the Orange Central area, 100 units an acre seemed appropriate. So it puts the downtown specific plan really in line with other multifamily mixed-use zoning in the city. And interestingly, we kind of back-engineered or reverse-engineered some of the recent projects to figure out where they landed in their density minus the incentive they got. And we came up with some pretty similar numbers. So we think we're pretty confident this is a sort of reasonable proposal. Again, this density per acre only applies for somebody applying SB 1818 and trying to very easily figure out what's their base so they can calculate their bonus. So moving on to the public open space incentive.
So I'm sorry. So that number that you showed on the that is a base number. That does not include incentives.
Correct. That would be the incentive only for affordable housing. So if you came in wanting to do an affordable housing project and the mid-orange, or like say the transitional district, which would be the west side of Central Avenue, your base starting out would be 90 units an acre, and then there's the ratio that SB 1818 applies that allows you to calculate how much of a percentage you can get above that.
Okay.
So this eliminates the need to sort of try to translate case-by-case FAR to units per acre.
Thank you.
So moving on to the public open space, as adopted right now, the downtown specific plan requires that an area equal to 5% of the site be dedicated or used as public open space. Generally, that's meant it needs to be at the sidewalk level, and we do allow landscaping and outdoor dining to be in that 5% area. So there is some ability to sort of use it for sort of the private purposes, if you will, of the project. But it does need to be open. John Key Public should be able to walk into that space. The incentive right now, if you double, say, that 5% to 10%, you're allowed to go immediately to the maximum floor area and height defined by the district. And where this has been a particular issue has been in the Orange Central District. The Orange Central District base is 6 stories and its maximum is 12. So somebody does 10% of the site area, they can suddenly add 6 stories onto the building. The East Broadway District, not so much of a problem because the base there is 4 stories and the maximum is 5. So there's this kind of gap based on the way that the districts are defined that has meant the open space has had, in some places, a really disproportionate benefit to development. And there's been relatively few design standards also associated with this. It's been subject to the individual design review. So what we proposed to council, and they agreed, was the bullets you see here, so that we would actually come up with a ratio for the open space to FAR. We had proposed that at least 50% of that open space be vertically open to the sky. We'll illustrate the impacts of that. Have a minimum 20-foot horizontal dimension, that it be at the sidewalk element. I think actually we should require a unique design element, whether that's public artwork subject to the art standards of the code, a signature tree or a fountain or something else that's approved by the review authority. So that's not just simply a big plaza, but there's something to attract people there that stands out.
Mr. Loomis, can you elaborate on that 20-foot minimum horizontal dimension?
Absolutely, because since I don't have an additional slide on that, in the common open space standards in the code in the downtown specific plan, say you're up on the podium level and it's the common space for residents of the building, we require 20-foot minimum horizontal dimensions so that open space has to be essentially a minimum 20 foot by 20 foot. We can't, say, have 7 feet by 40 feet and call that common space. So it means you have to consciously design it. It's not just a leftover sliver.
I see.
We have, in most of the development agreements on projects that have utilized the open space incentive, we required the standard hours that it needs to be open to the public from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's generally consistent with public parks, so we'd like to simply codify that, and then we'd like to require them to add a sign.
Mr. Loomis, I think there's a question.
I do have a
I'm sorry.
question. So we have seen some of the developments that had less than 20 feet, so there was no requirement before.
For the public open space bonus?
Correct.
No.
So that's why we've seen some of these linear, really not very usable elements.
Correct. Now, I will say in terms of the base standard, the 5% site area, where a lot of that has been applied is in order to get the 12-foot wide sidewalks. We have some projects where the public right-of-way, the public sidewalk is only 6 feet. So in effect, the project is providing a 6-foot setback to provide a 12-foot wide sidewalk, and we are counting that 6-foot setback towards the 5% open space that's required. But we'd like to say if you're going to get a bonus for it, if you're going to additional height and density, you need to not sort of extend that sidewalk all the way around the site. You need to give us an actual space that's identifiable as public open space. So at the moment, we're proposing that 5% requirement remain as it is, as it's drafted and adopted in the plan.
So for 5% requirement, you will allow linear type of open space?
Correct. And that's largely because, again, our public sidewalks, the right-of-way that we actually have is oftentimes well below 12 feet. 6 feet's the smallest I've seen it, sometimes 8 feet. So in a desire to have 12-foot wide sidewalks throughout the downtown, we allow developers to count that additional setback towards that 5% requirement.
Sure. Ms. Landry?
So if there is commercial there and it's restaurant, that open space can be used for tables and
Yeah,
lingering,
correct. Yeah, for sidewalk dining. Yeah.
but not the other 6 feet. How much open space does there need? Is that actually part of any of it in the DSP?
If I understand your question, we still need to maintain ADA clearance on the public sidewalks, and in some cases, what we've done is we end up having a sidewalk easement on private properties. The Lex on Orange, as it faces onto Orange Street, is a good example of that. There's only 6-foot public sidewalk, which is where we put street trees. The remaining 6 feet that of what appears to be public sidewalk so you can walk on is actually on private property, meeting that 5% open space standard and effectively a setback. And we have a sidewalk easement on that property in order to maintain the ADA access. If we didn't employ that sort of maneuver, we'd have no street trees on that particular street.
So the easement, does that allow any street furniture or any other?
It can, provided we maintain the ADA access down the sidewalk.
And they pay, for example, if they were to use or put chairs and bistro table and whatever, there is a modest fee that they pay to the city for the use of the sidewalk as well.
Correct, yeah. If you're using the sidewalk, you have to use the sidewalk dining permit fee. And
But they don't have to
permits.
pay a fee for the open space that
If it's on
is-
private property, no.
Correct.
Has there been any discussions why 5%? I mean, really, I think right now we are at a stage as far as downtown specific plan is concerned to look into a modest increase of making that 5% the baseline, making it at 7%, if you want to be bold, 10%. Has there been any discussions about that?
There was some discussion when the council took this up in February about potentially increasing that. In the end, they decided that they'd rather incentivize the additional open space. And we do end up into a sort of slippery area where that 5%, while it is a policy decision, the more we sort of request or require of development, we do end up into potential exaction issues and kind of potentially a legally fuzzy area in terms of what we're requiring, because we haven't made a nexus of our need for that additional open space versus what we're actually requiring.
Well, I wouldn't personally consider an exaction. You know, why is it not an exaction at 5%? Why should it be an exaction at 7%?
It's in some ways a legitimate policy question, but as I said, when the council sort of batted this one around, they did ask that question, and in the end they came back to, we'll leave it at 5% and hope that future development use the density bonus to provide more.
Just out of curiosity, comparing, this policy with other cities like Pasadena, Burbank, or even Los Angeles, are we pretty much comparable percentage-wise with them, or?
Off the top of my head, it's a legitimate question. I'd probably have to do some quick research to find out what's required in the Pasadena.
Would be curious to see, for example, Pasadena, Santa Monica, and
Yeah,
so
what they
forth.
require in public open space
And
as a
you'd be-
requirement
You'd
versus,
be pleasantly surprised.
yeah.
Thank you. You may go ahead.
So just sort of taking the low-hanging fruit on this topic, if you look at the public open space bonus program in San Francisco, New York, and other cities, they require development to post a sign that says it is publicly accessible space on private land and it has certain operating hours with standardized signs. So we had proposed that we should do this in Glendale. So these are some of the examples, not necessarily the sign that we'll ultimately require, but we'll develop something once this is adopted by the council. Assuming it is adopted by the council. This sequence of slides will illustrate the impact of requiring at least 50% of that public open space to be vertically open to the sky. This is a project at the corner of California and Central called the Legendary Tower. The address is 300 North Central. This project has utilized the existing public open space incentive provided in the downtown specific plan, and the two-story area kind of highlighted or outlined in yellow or orange is their public open space and benefit. It is entirely covered by the residential units located above on floors 3 through 5. It's kind of a carve-out, a sort of patio, a very generous loggia, a variety of different names you could refer to it as, but it's entirely covered and will be used for outdoor dining by an adjoining cafe. And it will have actually a fairly interesting public art component as part of it. By requiring at least 50% of that public open space to be open to the sky, same project, same building footprint would probably end up looking something like this. So in this illustration, we still have an arcade, so that the outdoor dining isn't entirely exposed because it's got a southern exposure, but you can see already the building has been sculpted, it's been cut, we're more articulated on the corner. This looks more like a public open space and less like a private patio. So not only does this have a benefit for the public open space, but it will also begin to articulate and sculpt some of the buildings in the downtown more than we've seen today, where they generally have tended to be fairly large boxes. Projects using this incentive, as if amended this way, will begin to have to sort of chip away at the building and provide a greater degree of architectural articulation, which I think is a positive thing.
So this is the second time that you bring up the art element and so forth. And since we do have an art fee, or which is 1% if they pay the money in lieu of the developer, and 2% if they decide to do it, would in any way this art element that you brought up twice in your presentation interfere with that or count as credit towards that, what we have?
The way it's drafted, if public open space was to provide public art, they would have to comply with the public art code as you just outlined. So it would be exactly the same. They'd have to go through the process. The public art would have to be 2% of the project value. It would have to be reviewed by the Arts Commission and ultimately approved by the Design Review Authority, which today is the City Council for the downtown specific plan area.
But I think a follow-up to that, is there an incentive for the public art that is equal to some of the other? So is there a bonus for the public art in
terms of a height and density
Yes.
bonus? No. You're the first person to suggest that.
I didn't suggest it.
To ask it.
I know this one they have exacted it. It is
Yes,
1%.
this is an exaction.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. You may go ahead.
So what we've proposed is a ratio between the additional public open space to additional floor area ratio to sort of address this kind of discrepancy that we have across the DSP. Is a ratio that for every additional 1 square foot of public open space the project provides, we get 10 square feet of additional floor area that or gross square footage, rentable, leasable square footage, sellable square footage. So to illustrate what that would look like, we took a site that, say, is 30,000 square feet, which is sort of comparable to some of the sites that are potentially available, 3/4 of an acre, and kind of ran the numbers. And then what we looked at is what it ends up happening when you kind of come to the end. The last column is the ratio 1 to 10. This table on the left, you've got what's the baseline for the districts. So again, let's look at the transitional districts where we see a good amount of development. Base FAR is 2.5, and this 30,000 square foot site at 5% would require us to provide 1,500 square feet of area for public open space purposes. The maximum height or density they could get is 3.0 FAR, so there is a delta between what they're allowed versus what they could maximum they could get of 15,000 square feet. And so this ratio of 1 to 10 means that in order to maximize that development potential, they would effectively need to provide another 1,500 square feet of public open space. In effect, they'd have to double what they're required to do. So we thought, actually, that makes a lot of sense. And this ratio and it generally holds that if the difference between the base and the maximum is 0.5 FAR, you have to double the open space. Now, when we move to Orange Central, where again we have a difference between 6 stories or 3.0 FAR to 12 stories or 5.2 FAR, quite a bit of difference. In order to maximize that development potential, not only is the developer probably needing to go into a high-rise construction, additional costs there, but they would have to provide an additional 6,600 square feet of open space. So it would really have to be substantial for them to maximize that delta in their development. Whereas in the East Broadway district, which is largely a residential neighborhood area of the downtown, not a lot of commercial development, in order to maximize the delta to the full potential between 2.5 FAR to 2.75, they'd only need to provide another 750 square feet, so they wouldn't have to do quite as much. So when we sort of proposed for ourselves this 1 to 10 ratio, the numbers seem to make sense relative to the kind of scale and intensity of development the DSP is providing. And I will say 1 to 10 also has the sort of convenience of being a very easy ratio to administer over the phone or explain over the phone or at the counter or in a conference room when we're sort of trying on scratch paper trying to figure out potential development scenarios.
So, Mr. Loomis, let me ask you a question about this this baseline of 5% that has not been exacted as of yet. Wouldn't it make sense, or has there been any thought to adjust this baseline to the different districts? It seems to me that Broadway with 2.0 versus Orange Central, that your maximum can be 5.2. And I understand it's a matter of percentage. For the same two districts to use the same baseline just doesn't sound right. In other words, I would think that Orange Central, that your maximum FAR with your incentives can rise to 5.2, should require a higher baseline, as opposed to a Broadway that has got a lower FAR and from 2.5 goes to 3.0, for example.
Right.
Has there been any thoughts about that?
So if I understand the question, you're asking whether the baseline at the 5% requirement should be adjusted to the different districts based on the density that the different districts have.
Higher baseline based on a higher incentive?
No, we hadn't considered that. What we actually did look at was potentially adjusting the incentive ratio based on that presumption. And what we found is that because of the different gap in the FAR between the baseline and what the DSP allows, the 1 to 10 sort of generated the greater open space kind of naturally with the presumption that a developer would want to maximize their available density by using an incentive. But we didn't consider modifying the baseline per different districts and their different density requirements.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Since I wasn't aware that new considerations were possible, has anybody thought about possibly monetizing this process? And here's what I'm saying. Let's say I want to build a building in the DSP, and I want to do what this plan calls for. It's just that when we add 700-800 or a couple of thousand square feet of open space to one of these buildings, I know on paper it's open space, but I wonder how true that is. It's a nice addition to the building. It gives the building some character. Those around that building enjoy whatever it is they're seeing, but is it open space in the sense that can the people of the can the residents of Glendale really enjoy it in any meaningful way? And if the idea is to make this a meaningful exercise, it seems to me the better means of accomplishing our goals is to monetizing this, collecting all the money, putting all that money together, buying some land where you can have an actual park. Now that's open space. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So, has anybody thought about that? Or am I completely off my...
I would respectfully disagree with you. Because
the first part, the second part, or the third part?
third part. I mean, I think
All parts, maybe.
if I may say, the cost of land fluctuates. So what would be the assessment? And any times there are assessments, if you look at the Quimby Act, it assesses money, it receives money. The areas where it has to be applied within a certain radius, so these monies sit there and they wait and they can't apply them because there's no land that they can buy with that money. So I think exacting it out of the property at the same time is really the only appropriate way to do it, because otherwise you have funds that just sit there, accrue money, and are not able to be expended in the manner they were intended to. So it's a great idea, but it's not a really functional idea in the kind of real estate market that we have here that's so volatile.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Loomis will give us some background about development impact fees and park fees, because right now we collect those from the developments.
So, that's correct. We do have a park fee that its latest, maybe Yvette or Tim remembers off the top of my head the exact number, but it's somewhere around $18,000 per residential unit. Council last year adopted that. That's the full fee when the Nexus study was done, I think in 2007, to assess the sort of need for new parkland and the cost that a new residential unit would bear for providing additional parkland. So at $18,000, that's the full impact fee. So projects in the downtown provide 5%, or they provide 10% or 12%, whatever. If they engage in this program or not, they still need to pay that $18,000 per residential unit. And when we have projects that are in the 100-plus units, ends up being a fairly significant check that development ends up writing. So this, by providing the additional or engaging in the public open space heightened density program, is the developers still, even with providing additional units, they have to pay that $18,000 on those additional units as well. It doesn't get them out of that requirement.
All right.
So in a sense, we are doing what you had asked.
I just want more of it.
I will say, in terms of some of the standards we're proposing, it's been part of the criticism of some of the recent projects that what has been public open space provided by development that then translates into additional height and density for those developments doesn't look like public open space. And the legendary tower project I illustrated is an example of that. So some of the standards we're trying to write in here would try and make it more obvious that that's public open space for the citizens of Glendale to use, and particularly, by providing the sign in some sort of prominent location. Right. So we're trying to address that at this as well. So if we can move on to sustainable design incentives. There is currently in the DSP 2 incentives related to sustainable design. They're both pegged to the U.S. Green Buildings Council's LEED certification standards. These were added at the very tail end of the downtown specific plan drafting, kind of almost literally at the final adoption hearing.
Mr. Loomis, I'm sorry, how long would this segment take?
On the green building incentives? Yeah. As long or as short as you'd like it. It's just the one slide.
We'd like to get whatever you needed to present, maybe about 5 minutes?
Sure. Would 5 minutes to conclude the whole presentation?
No, just this segment, okay. Right? Because after 5 minutes, we'd like to take a break.
Okay,
and then you can continue.
No problem.
Thank you.
I'll be less than 5 minutes.
Thank you.
So as I was saying, there's two different incentives, and you can see them here that are pegged to the LEED certification standards. If you're unfamiliar with LEED, it's basically similar to the Olympics. There's different gold, silver, platinum, bronze certified metals that you can get for different levels of performance, platinum being the highest. When the DSP was adopted, we simply inserted the incentive but didn't have a mechanism to implement it. Part of the dilemma is that the certification is done after the building is constructed by an outside party, not the city. So we are, in effect, giving a density bonus and a zoning entitlement on the promise that the project's going to get a certification maybe 24 or 36 months later. So in practice, what we've done is we've required development that wants to pursue this to post a construction bond or a performance bond that is equal to the value they're getting for that additional density. During the course of construction, once they get the certification, we release the bond, and the two projects have utilized this. One's been completed, one's under construction. So we'd like to write that process into the DSP so development is clear that that's the process they have to go through. The other issue is that since the subsequent amendments to the California Green Building Code and Glendale's amendments to that, LEED Silver is basically the same as being code compliant. So we suggested to the council that we would eliminate the green building incentive and only keep LEED Gold or Platinum, because that LEED Gold and Platinum does get you a higher level of performance than the Green Building Code does today. So council concurred with us on this. And that concludes
That concludes this segment.
this segment.
So, Ms. Stadler, if we may, we would like to take a 5-minute break, going to a recess. So the public hearing at this moment is still open?
It's still open, and you're just taking a recess.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think of library towers in downtown LA and the trade.
So we are back from our recess, and it is 6:16. Mr. Loomis, you may proceed.
Thank you. So we left off with sustainable design. We concluded that. The last, I believe it's the last incentive to consider, as drafted, the downtown specific plan had an incentive for quote, unquote, signature design. That was a bonus of up to 3 stories in height. The standards for that were largely subjective and built around design review. There were 1 or 2 projects, mostly a couple of the high-rise projects that were proposed at the early stages of the downtown specific plan that utilized this. One of them was an extraordinary design. I'm sure Mr. Historian remembers the original proposal for Verdugo Gardens with sort of hanging sky gardens. It was a very iconic building. I think everybody agreed that met signature design. But in practice, applying this was very difficult. So we suggested to the council we just shouldn't entertain this anymore, and we should strike it out altogether, and they agreed. There are a few other amendments. As I said in the notice, it says miscellaneous text and map amendments, so just hit a few of these here. The open space standards that exist in the DSP, we're proposing to clarify the writing or the language of that, but not modify any of the standards of the policies. The current standards are that, and the way I've explained this to a lot of developers is we're going to start by adding up what's the overall number of square footage of open space required in the project. And it starts with an area equal to 10% of the site area. If you're a commercial or retail building, you end there. If you have residential or live work, you need to provide an additional 140 square feet for every unit. That ultimately generates a number, or square footage number. Of that, an area equal to 5% of the site needs to be publicly accessible, which we've discussed already. The balance of it can be distributed however the development team chooses to do so, whether that's all on private balconies, all on common space, additional public open space, etc. The language that we had written in the DSP is a point where we have almost always had to clarify the standards with developers. So the new language we've vetted through most of the senior staff that has worked on these projects, and I think it's a more clear explanation of what the requirements are. But we're not changing any of the standards. There's a number of map amendments that we're making. We've proposed to add the boundaries of the Downtown Glendale Association or the private bid to the map, and actually they're on the map behind you. That was a proposal we made to council. We think that might be somewhat helpful in that overall district map, since they do have a sort of function, although it's outside the city. It has been raised to ask why we're including the boundaries of a private association on a city-sponsored map, so that may be a point that the Planning Commission could raise or discuss. Should the bid change its boundaries, then we'd have to amend the maps for the actions of private development. At the time the downtown specific plan was adopted, the bike plan was not adopted, so there are no bike routes identified in the mobility or open space maps. We now have a very robust bike planning program and an adopted bike plan, so all the bike routes as adopted in the plan would be included in the DSP. We're also proposing to indicate all the bus stops in the downtown. We have found in our design review that identifying bus stop locations and designing buildings around them to accommodate bus and transit users has been fairly important. So potentially having the bus stops actually identified in a map in the DSP sort of helps highlight that necessity up front. And then finally, there are specific frontage standards that are both use-based and sometimes design standard-based in the DSP. There are primary frontage standards that apply to the sort of storefront experience on Brand Boulevard. There are residential standards that are setback standards in the East Broadway district, and kind of entertainment standards that apply almost exclusively to Maryland and the Art and Entertainment District. When we adopted the DSP, we also had something called secondary frontage standards that's mostly on Central and East Broadway, and then auto standards, frontage standards on Glendale and Colorado. And the 8 years we've been implementing the DSP, we found that those standards are almost meaningless. They've really had no meaningful effect. So eliminating them altogether just makes things a lot clearer. And it allows us to sort of say our primary focus is on that retail experience around Brand Boulevard. Another kind of important consideration we're modifying is the diagrams in the transitional districts section of the urban design standards. The drawings that exist are for fairly large projects on sites that really have no meaning in downtown Glendale anymore. So these three drawings, which are the proposed diagrams, illustrate design conditions, one, that we've seen and implemented with projects, and then two are probably more appropriate for downtown development sites. So what you see on the left, the upper left, is basically the project at Carmel, at Central and Duran, where the open space is located at ground level. In the back is a sort of park or mid-block paseo, is the transition between the large downtown development and the adjoining multifamily neighborhoods. The bottom diagram shows the sort of ziggurat stair-stepping down to those smaller units from a kind of more 5 or 6 story urban frontage. The upper right shows the notion that maybe all the open space should be located in the back, particularly where there might, and this is for a mid-block site rather than a corner site, particularly where we might have some single-family development typology backing up to the downtown. So these have all been implemented successfully in downtown projects, so these are abstractions of some of the lessons we've learned doing design review and are more appropriate to what we think future development might look like. So that's an overview of the amendments that are being proposed to the DSP as part of the ordinance that you see, as well as I said, a few other kind of minor text amendments here and there. We have also prepared an addendum to the final EIR that was adopted by the Downtown Specific Plan. As you may know, addendums are not subject really to Planning Commission certification or City Council certification, but it is provided for your consideration. Insofar as all the amendments we're proposing, by and large, restrict development or make it more difficult to get to the, or strenuous to get to the ultimate thresholds that the DSP EIR evaluated, we don't see any new impacts beyond what was originally disclosed in the EIR that was adopted with the Downtown Specific Plan. And that's essentially what the addendum says. The DSP EIR discloses the impacts. These amendments will not increase the severity of those impacts. So the actions we're asking of you tonight is to recommend to the City Council the proposed amendments to the DSP, and that part of that is a resolution for finding consistencies with the general plan, which the DSP is a general plan level document. I will note that I provided an additional new copy of the resolution on the dais for you. The original copy still refers to the May 20th date, so the updated copy refers to, in all locations, June 3rd. And with that, that concludes our presentation. Happy to entertain any other additional questions.
Thank you, Mr. Loomis. Any questions for Mr. Loomis? Yes, please.
Mr. Loomis, I enjoyed reading this. I like the way we've implemented it. There were a couple of areas that I don't, that I know were brought up that were not brought up at council, but I think they are considerations that maybe should be thought about. One are the, when you look at the central projects, pedestrian access, and I mean across the street, was never considered, and that's something that I think when you did the super block on one side, it really created not a very pedestrian environment. And so the pedestrian considerations need to be taken in as two sides of a street and not one side of a street, and I think that has been failed in here, and I don't know if that can be reiterated, but you don't just look at the street frontage in front of the building, you look at it how you can access it, especially in terms of mobility, and we're trying to make a more walkable city. So that's an issue that I would like to
Can I ask a clarifying question? When you said Central, are you referring to Central Avenue?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes.
And in that case, you're referring to that we have some very long blocks on Central Avenue. Our blocks are typically 600 feet long.
I think they even could qualify as super blocks.
Yes. Their typical downtown block is 600 feet long.
That's atypical there.
Well, I'm looking at between, say, California and Wilson is about a 600-foot block. It's almost a quarter-mile walk to walk around the block in some portions of downtown. So in particular, you're talking about those blocks. And
well, but these are blocks
pedestrian access are you referring to?
These blocks were removed and made into a super block. So any of the access that was there was just not acknowledged. The ability to have a pedestrian environment exist in being able to have shorter walks and a little more convenient, and that was removed with that. And I think that consideration needs to be brought in here. I'm on the Pedestrian Advisory Board, and I really think that some of the pedestrian elements in streetscape elements for people need to be considered as a whole street and not just as one side of a street. And I don't know how to bring that up in here, but as we become denser, it really should be a huge issue. So that was a question that I would like to maybe have looked at and presented. And I think the other pedestrian committee would concur with me.
So are you suggesting creating some sort of paseo in the middle of the development to get to the other side?
At times, yeah, so that there's a little more comfortable pedestrian access.
If I may.
You may.
Try and answer,
Sure.
address those concerns. Couple of points on that. There is admittedly some super blocks in the downtown, especially at the north portion of the downtown and what was once known as the financial district. There's potentially limited things we can do about that. As regards to the sort of long frontage of new development as it comes in, we have tried very hard in our design review to ensure that they have kind of consistent doorways. In fact, one of the standards in the DSP is you can't go more than 50 feet without providing a doorway of some kind, whether it's a lobby or retail. One of the things we're actually, I'm glad you brought this up because one of the other things we're writing in as part of the design standards is that residential units that are located on the first floor would be required to have a residential stoop accessing the sidewalk.
And not part of that setback.
Well, the private portion would have to be not part of the setback.
Right.
So the Lex on Orange, its Orange Street frontage does that fairly well. We've seen some other projects where that's what we thought we were going to get out of it when we saw the design drawings, but then when the approvals, but then when it was implemented, we don't have enough room to do it. So codifying that as a standard we think is important. So we maintain that regular, consistent pedestrian access. So we do try very hard in the design review process to try and make sure we're getting a significant number of doors at a kind of regular interval to activate the streets. We have tried on a few occasions to implement mid-block passages, and the open space map in the DSP outlines a number of mid-block passages we'd like to see happen. That's not always possible because a development proposal doesn't always control both sides of the block or either side of the block. But I will point to say the Carmel Partners project, we do have mid-block passages on both sides of the block to try and implement that. So we've had some success where there's a large parcel of land under control. I'm not really sure how to take your point about both sides of the street and what we can do about that. So maybe you could elaborate.
Well, the
what your
streetscape
intention
is the streetscape is usually just the development oriented. But if you improve a street, you would improve a street for all of its traffic, whether it's one way or two ways. So what happens typically is when you do pedestrian improvements, you deal with them on one side, but a pedestrian path goes somewhere, and those connections should be part of every development, and oftentimes they aren't. So that's what I am saying. It's the pedestrian connections from a new development to another need to be enhanced, not just either continued if they are not good. I think the sidewalk on the projects on Central seem smaller than I thought they were going to be. So
how wide are they, Mr. Lewis?
They have to be a minimum, for the new development, it's a minimum 12 foot from the curb to the first floor building face. Minimum, a 12-foot average.
So, for example, on Lex and Orange, do we have 12 feet on Central side?
Yes. I think actually it might be like 14 feet.
Very good.
So.
thank you.
Any other questions?
No, there was
Mr.
just
Megan?
concerns, I
How
think.
about you, sir? None. Okay, so if we don't have any questions for staff, should we close the public hearing so we can deliberate or make recommendations or whatever the wishes of my colleagues are?
Yes.
It is so closed. The public hearing is closed.
So just by recommending this resolution to the city council, is that what we're doing?
Well, if you want to add stuff to it, you're more than welcome to do so. Because I do have a couple of suggestions to make. And then perhaps if staff can take notes of those and that can be passed on to the council, then it's their wish, whichever way they're going to go for it. But I'll wait for you if you have any other suggestions. Okay, very good. So the first recommendation let me ask you a question before I start making a recommendation. We copied, and you gave us copies of the Glendale Water and Power report that was part of the 2006 EIR. And we are looking at pages 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. If you look at page 15, the first table, Mr. Loomis, is table 5. And we are in 2015 right now. I mean, I can go and take 2010, but we'll take 2015. And I believe we are in a single year within multiple year dry period. And it states that our water demand without the downtown specific plan is it 37 million acre per feet? Do we know this, Mr. Loomis, or is it 37,000? It should be million, right?
I'm going to turn to Laura Stotler since she was coordinating with Eric Krause and GWP at the last minute to try and interpret this data.
Yeah, and at this point, my guess is as good as yours.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to have somebody from GWP here. But let's look at the numbers in abstracts for a moment. So we have 37,196 acre per feet. And with downtown specific plan would be the table 5A, would make that to 38,230 acre per feet. Now, if we go to page 13 of the same report, and we look at 2015, we look at the total supply of the water acre per feet for the city of Glendale, which is 35,091. I just want to know if GWP can confirm these numbers, because these were projections from 2006, obviously. And I want to know how much of it has come through, is true, has worked out the way that it's been projected. Because drought and dry years are something that is on everybody's mind nowadays. And even if I were to look at these numbers in abstract, I will see that the total supply falls short of even the projected number that the GWP has given with or without the downtown specific plan. Of course, these were projections. So if we can get some numbers, and if you can perhaps communicate those numbers to the council and to us eventually, we would appreciate it. You see where I'm headed with this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, and I apologize we were not able to get somebody from GWP to try and answer that question, but short notice.
No apologies necessary. It's just we are a recommending body, and it will be interesting to see, to know what this is, and perhaps that's when we can even talk about other incentives on how to, make up the difference of what is being supplied and what we are using actually. But that's a discussion for a different day. All right, so as far as my recommendations are concerned, Mr. Loomis, to the council, will be that the baseline of that open space incentive, the 5% public open space, should be adjusted accordingly to the district. The denser the district, the higher this baseline should be. In other words, it is not at this, I think right now as a city, we can afford to say that we want to have even sporadic, small spaces in downtown that we needed to be green, and we're attracting it. I'm in the business, and we're attracting quality people and quality businesses to the city as we speak. So in my opinion, increasing this density or adjusting it, the baseline, to the density of the district should not be, it'll be a modest request. So that will be my recommendation. Again, I gave you the example. If you're in Orange Central District that you can, with incentives, get to 5.2, this at 5%, it should not stay at 5%. It should be, in fact, in my opinion, should be at 8%,
right,
or even better, at 10%. So that would be my first recommendation. The second recommendation would be, and again, perhaps it's my fault that I didn't watch the council meeting to find out what the logic was behind not incentivizing museums and art gallery places. But I think until such time that we have evidence, not even preponderance of evidence, one or two art galleries or museums that are standalones, we should not take this out of our code. I think it's something that if we can incentivize it, hey, we should use it in regards to art galleries and museums. So other than that, I think the changes that have been suggested and the council has decided to go by, they are apt. And as always, I don't want to adulate any further or be obsequious, but your presentation was also very well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're ready, I believe, to make...
I would like to make a supporting comment.
Sure.
Right now in downtown Los Angeles, in the densest areas where they're doing the lofts, they're putting in parklets. They're taking parts of the street and adding in public open space. So rather than having to go into that direction, I believe that Mr. Astorian's observations are forward-thinking and would be very wisely implemented.
Thank you. Very good. Anybody wants to move the resolution? I believe we have the new one in front of us.
I move with the comments from commissioners, a resolution of the Planning Commission, the City of Glendale, recommending adoption of a general plan amendment, case number PGPA 1503-604 and PGPA 1503-605, amending the downtown specific plan relating to height and density bonuses and related miscellaneous text and map amendments. So the Planning Commission of the City of Glendale does hereby resolve as follows, and Section 123.
You have a second for that?
Second.
Very good. Ms. Shanaz, roll call, please.
Planning Commissioners Landrigan,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Malukian,
Aye.
Chairperson Astorian.
Yes, thank you. Next item on the agenda is item number 8, which is Community Development Department updates. Ms. Stotler, Ms. Shanaz, Mr. Loomis. Mr. Loomis, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I have two updates. Relative to the downtown specific plan, we were pleased to find out fairly recently, in the past couple of weeks, the City of Glendale is receiving an APA award from the LA chapter for implementing the downtown specific plan and mobility study. And even more exciting is that, well, perhaps more exciting, equally exciting, the award ceremony will be on June 24th at the Alex Theater in downtown Glendale.
That's
So
terrific.
we'll forward the information to you if you'd like to purchase tickets and attend. We're very excited about that.
Congratulations.
And then a second announcement relative to Commissioner Landrigan's discussion on parklets and pedestrian safety and programs. Last night, the City Council, on a consent item, took consideration of the Pedestrian Safety Task Force recommendations from Public Works Department. As part of that was an authorization to issue 2 different RFPs that the Community Development Department will be leading. The first is to develop a pedestrian master plan for the city. That would be akin to the bike master plan adopted a few years ago. And the second is to develop a pedestrian safety education program that would go concurrent to that. Those are both grant-funded projects from the Active Transportation Program administered by the state. We've got $500,000 in grant money for both of those projects. It's a very competitive program. Glendale received ultimately 3 awards out of, I think, over 140 that were applied for. So we've done very, very well in that program. So we're excited about that. We'll be RFPs will be issued shortly. We hope to have those projects up and running in September, October.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Mr. Loomis. Ms. Stotler, you don't have any other comments?
Nope.
He stole the show away from you this time, right?
That's
With
fine.
that, commissioner comments.
A question. So on the corner of Central and it's not Monterey, it's the one of the new projects that's going up by Doran and Central. I'm just curious, when does the traffic department walk in and change the lights and make adjustments in anticipation of the development going online? Or do we wait until it goes online and then changes are made?
I believe a lot of those improvements are built into the capital improvements budget, so I'm not sure what the timing is for that exact corner, but I know when they have a large project going and they're taking funds for it, I know it becomes part of the long-term plan. But in terms of that specific corner, I don't know.
Okay. Fair enough.
Very good. If there is no comments or other questions, may we adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.